Have you ever wondered why some people simply can't let go of what's already gone? I'm not talking about the usual romantic attachments, the clinging, the begging, the endless what-ifs. I mean that invisible thread that still pulls at the soul when someone walks away, not in anger, not with theatrics, but with clarity. Carl Jung once said, "What is not made conscious manifests as fate." And sometimes, fate arrives not as thunder, but as silence, the kind that transforms. Picture this. A man, long accustomed to emotional control. He sets the rhythm. He believes he commands the game. His ego wears the crown, convinced he decides when things begin and when they end. But one day, without warning, without protest, without even a trace of bitterness, she stops answering. There's no blocking, no lashing out, no final confrontation. Just silence. A silence so mature it borders on sacred. A void, not empty but full of presence. At first, he feels nothing. Or so he tells himself. His ego shrugs, smug and unbothered. She's playing, it whispers. She'll be back, they always come back. Because in his world, every relationship follows the same worn-out script. Until now. This woman isn't retreating in resentment. She's not punishing him, not manipulating. She's simply elsewhere. Not in hiding, but inhabiting a new version of herself. And that quiet, graceful departure, is what haunts him most. She no longer runs. No longer chases. No longer explains or justifies. And this is where the real conflict begins. Because, as Jung said, the male unconscious doesn't respond to logic first, it responds to symbols. And the symbol of this woman has changed. She is no longer the one who waits. She is the one who walked away, with dignity, with grace, without a word of blame. He doesn't understand it yet, not fully. But something stirs inside him. An echo. A hollow space. An unspoken question. Days pass. He goes on with his life, or at least, he tries to. He goes out. He laughs. He posts curated moments online. He replies to messages. But beneath it all, somewhere deep in the background of his mind, something feels misaligned. It isn't quite nostalgia. Not yet. It's more like a quiet internal disturbance, a subtle unraveling of the emotional order he once thought unshakable. And then, without warning, an image begins to form, not just any image, but the image. His anima, the inner feminine, sculpted over time by memory, by wounds, by the first woman he ever knew, his mother. That inner figure had always conformed to certain shapes. Predictable. Familiar. Comforting. But now, it begins to shift. Because this woman, this real woman, doesn't fit the old mold. She didn't scream. She didn't plead. She didn't break things on her way out. She just disappeared, in silence. A silence that, far from being empty, pulses with presence. It fills the room. It fills him. And it unsettles him more than any confrontation ever could. And the most unsettling part? He can't name it. He doesn't know if it's pride, a decision, or indifference. He only knows one thing. He can't stop thinking about her. Because when a woman stops insisting, it isn't she who loses. It's he who is left alone, face to face with his own shadow. And now I ask you honestly. Have you ever chosen silence as a form of self-love, and watched as that silence quietly transformed everything around you? If you have, share your story in the comments. It might offer strength to another woman who, today, needs to remember how to listen to herself. Because the sixth sign, the real one, isn't something you see. It's something you feel. In the body. In the breath. In the silence between thoughts. And he feels it now. Not in words, not in tears, but in the subtle unraveling of his control. He doesn't cry. He doesn't make grand declarations. But his script, the one that made him so composed, so untouchable, so in control, is beginning to fracture. He responds slower now. He second guesses. He grows restless. He loses focus. And beneath the surface, a quiet frustration begins to churn. Jung wrote that when the unconscious is activated, it speaks through symptoms. And emotional disarray is one of them. Because what the ego refuses to feel, the body finds a way to express. In the mood, in the dreams, in the sleep that won't come, in the appetite that disappears, in the calm that cracks. The silence she chose wasn't empty. It was a mirror. And now he can no longer look away. Everything begins to shift within him, subtly at first, then with a weight he can no longer ignore. He doesn't know how to name it. He only knows that something isn't sitting right. You're no longer there, and yet you are. You're in his thoughts, uninvited. You appear in dreams, soft, incomplete, lingering. You echo in the song playing faintly in the background while he works. You exist in the corners of familiar places, in the light of a memory he didn't expect to hold on to. You're in the energy, and energy doesn't lie. He tries to distract himself. He changes his routine. He goes out more. He talks to new people. But something has shifted. The escape no longer works. Because now, even the escape feels hollow. That's the sixth sign, the moment a man loses his ability to numb his own pain. And begins, whether he wants to or not, to actually feel it. And you, on the other side, do nothing. You don't write. You don't call. You don't demand explanations. You simply remain in your silence. And that not doing disarms him more than any fight ever could. Because arguments? He understood those. He knew how to win, how to deflect, how to dominate a confrontation. But silence, calm, dignified resignation, he has no defense for that. And that's when another symptom appears. Self-justification. He begins to craft stories. Little mental mantras. It wasn't that deep. She made mistakes too. It was for the best. But the more he repeats them, the less they soothe him. Instead of bringing peace, they bring unease. Because now he's not convincing you. He's trying to convince himself. And the more he needs to justify, the more obvious it becomes. He hasn't let go. Not really. Not at all. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever watched a man begin to falter, not because of words, but because of your quiet withdrawal? If you have, share it. Because, sometimes, what he can't put into words, you've already understood in silence. And that, my dear, is emotional wisdom. But there are still more signs, more subtle truths that reveal themselves only with time. Because the deepest part of this loss isn't spoken. It can't be. It emerges in what he can no longer manage. He doesn't realize it yet, not consciously. But he's already lost control. Not over you. He lost that long ago. But over the idea of you. And that loss is no small thing. It's a wound to the ego. A rupture in the script he clung to, the one where you were always the constant. The one who stayed. Who replied. Who forgave. In his mind, your silence is still temporary. A pause. A tactic. But his body has begun to betray him. There's a restlessness that won't leave. A compulsive need to check if you've watched his stories, like to post, left any trace. Not out of love, not yet, but out of habit. Because the ego craves proof. Proof that it still holds power. Proof that it hasn't been erased. And yet, your absence speaks louder than anything you could have said. And it's beginning to echo in places he thought were safe. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, that hidden part of ourselves we conceal, even from our own awareness. And when you choose silence, not out of revenge, not as manipulation, but as an act of self-respect, what you place before him is not an absence, but a mirror. And in that mirror, he no longer sees the woman who once adored him. He sees someone who is no longer there. More importantly, he begins to see himself reflected in the void you've left behind. And that disarms him. Because now, there is no external villain. No argument to win. No chaos to control. Only emptiness. And absence, when it is not understood, wounds deeper than presence ever could. He begins to remember the smallest things. How you smiled softly while serving him coffee. The way you stayed silent after he crossed a line. That final look in your eyes before you walked away. Moments once dismissed now return as quiet hauntings. And this is when something essential occurs. The unconscious begins its work. Not through logic, but through symbols. As Jung said, the psyche speaks in dreams. And now, he dreams of you. Not in romantic visions, but in fragments. In symbols. In landscapes that make no sense to his conscious mind, but stir something deep. Because the truth is no longer knocking at the door. It's already entered through the back. And it's rearranging everything inside. He sees you from afar. He hears your voice, in memory, in dream, in song, but he can't reach you. And when he wakes, there's a heaviness. A strange mix of emptiness and urgency. He's not sure if he truly wants to come back. He only knows this. He can't bear not knowing if he still can. At this point, your silence is no longer a pause. It has become a symbol, not of absence, but of evolution. A quiet but powerful declaration of who you've become. And that confronts him in a way no argument ever did. Because while you've stepped into a more conscious, self-aware version of yourself, he remains suspended, stuck in emotional inertia, in a loop of unexamined patterns. So now I ask you, have you ever noticed that the more you valued yourself in silence, the more they sought you out? Did someone ever try to return, only once you were no longer emotionally available? If so, share your experience below. Because sometimes your story, your moment of clarity, is the mirror another woman needs to see her own worth. He won't say it aloud. But he feels it. Something slipped through his fingers. And it wasn't a fight. It wasn't a scene. It was the kind of departure that leaves no mess, no unfinished arguments, no emotional residue. You simply stopped being there, and for a man accustomed to constant validation, that's deeply disorienting. Not because you punished him, but because he wasn't prepared for your maturity, he was prepared for your reaction. Your complaints, even your pleading, but not for your silence. Not the kind that wounds, but the kind that doesn't yield. the kind that doesn't scream, but also doesn't wait. And that's where his real problem begins. He doesn't know how to face you without your words, because it was your words that gave him the script. And now, he has nothing to read from. Carl Jung once said that everything we deny within ourselves eventually rules us from the outside. And in this case, your conscious withdrawal has awakened something in him, the shadow of his own emotional dependency. He won't admit it. Not yet. Not even to himself. But each day, your absence grows heavier. Not because there aren't other people around him, but because no presence can fill the space left by someone who chose not to insist anymore. And then, the first sign appears. A reaction to one of your old posts. A like on a forgotten photo. A quiet view of your story. It's not a message. Not a real approach. It's a test. A whisper. I'm still here. And you see it. You feel it. But you don't move. Because your silence is no longer a space for negotiation. It's a statement of self-worth, not because you don't feel anything, but because you now understand that acting on impulse would mean betraying yourself. This is the moment when the energy shifts. Subtly but unmistakably. You are no longer the one seeking answers. He is the one beginning to ask questions. And the most haunting of them all. Why doesn't she need me anymore? Until now, his ego had crafted a story. A narrative where your worth was tied to his recognition. Your value measured by how much you stayed, how much you gave, how much you endured. But something has changed. He senses it. You chose yourself. And that wounds him. Not simply because he's losing you, but because he's starting to understand. He never truly had you. What he mistook for possession was in truth your patience, your tenderness, your hope, but not anymore. That version of you no longer exists. Now, you've become someone else. More conscious, more grounded, more awake. And so I ask you, have you lived through that transformation? That inner shift from needing validation to simply feeling whole? Was there a moment, quiet or shattering, when you finally realized your worth didn't depend on anyone else? If so, share it in the comments. Because your story might just awaken something in another woman. Someone who is still learning how to return home to herself. He begins to look inward, even if he doesn't yet realize it. Because true silence, the kind born of self-love, isn't just heard on the outside. It's felt on the inside. And what he feels now isn't guilt, nor sadness, nor even love. It's confusion. A quiet, emotional disorientation he can't quite name. But one that lives in the pauses. In the empty spaces where you used to be. Jung wrote that consciousness expands when we face the unknown. And to him, you are now that. An unfamiliar, ungraspable presence that no longer fits within his expectations. He doesn't know if you left out of pride or healing. And that ambiguity unsettles him. Because when a woman chooses silence, without resentment, without theatrics, without manipulation, what remains is pure energy. Energy that is no longer offered, but is also no longer denied. It's simply no longer available. And that absence, calm, complete, unapologetic, begins to collapse something inside him. This is no longer just about missing you. This is about confronting himself. About reflecting on his role in what was lost. About finally asking why he assumed you'd always stay. Even when he didn't protect you. Didn't value you. Didn't hear you. Because you were there. Until you weren't. And for an emotionally immature man, that's a wound not easily processed. At this point, the most childlike attempt to regain control may surface. A casual phrase. A message without context. A soft "Hey, everything okay?" sent at a quiet hour. Not because he truly wants to see you, but because he needs to know if he still can. If he still has access. If the door is still cracked open. But now your response, if it even comes, holds no urgency. No expectation. No anxiety. It carries something else entirely. Presence. Centeredness. Clarity. Jung once said the soul needs conflict in order to grow. And this is his conflict. Not a battle with you, but a confrontation with his own reflection. With the image of himself he once believed unshakable. Because your silence has shown him something he had never been forced to see. That he's not as strong as he thought. That he didn't hold as much power as he believed. That the woman who was once there, who forgave, who waited, who softened, is no longer. Not because she hates him, but because she chose herself. And now, I invite you to reflect. How many times have you responded out of fear of losing someone, rather than from a genuine desire to stay? How many times did you choose the relationship, when what your soul truly needed was for you to choose yourself? If that has ever been your journey, if you've ever remained silent not out of anger, but out of self-respect, and in that silence discovered your own strength, share it with me in the comments. Your story may be the mirror someone else needs today. You have no idea how many women may find their reflection in your story. Because somewhere someone is learning to listen to her own silence, and realizing it speaks louder than any plea ever could. He begins to understand now. Even if he doesn't say it. Even if he'll never admit it. He's losing you. And not because of a fight. Not because of betrayal. He's losing you in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't accuse. Doesn't chase. Doesn't beg. The silence that simply holds. And the longer it holds, the deeper it confronts him. Because for him, the bond felt guaranteed. He believed there would always be another chance. Another late-night message. Another door left ajar. But now, there is no door. There is only an invisible wall, built of self-love, dignity, and introspection. And that wall? It wasn't built to punish him. It was built to protect you. Carl Jung spoke of the need to integrate our inner polarities. The masculine and the feminine, the conscious and the unconscious, desire and reason. And your silence now is exactly that. Balance. You are no longer present out of need. No longer available through illusion. You are there, if and when you choose. Not because you're seeking anything, but because you've found yourself. You are, or more precisely, you are not, from a new place within yourself. A place that no longer negotiates for peace. A place that no longer trades your boundaries for connection. He keeps testing the waters. A subtle signal. a vague message, a nostalgic reference. But none of it moves you like it once did. Because now you don't react. You choose. And that's the difference. Before you waited. Now you decide. And he feels that shift. Even if he can't name it. Even if he doesn't understand it. He feels it. And it destabilizes him. He might begin to share memories. A song, a photo, a passing moment from the past. Not because he fully grasps what's happening, but because some part of his soul is reaching for what's slipping away. As Jung said, memories hold symbolic weight. And when the unconscious longs for comfort, it reaches for symbols of what was once safe, once soft, once known. But you know now. That comfort no longer belongs to you. You're not here to soothe his guilt. You're not here to hold his confusion. You're here to hold yourself. And then comes the deepest turning point of all. You no longer fear that he won't come back. Because you have. You've returned to yourself. To your center. To your own voice. The one you used to quiet for the sake of connection. But now listen to with reverence. And that return, the return to yourself, is more valuable than any external reconciliation. Because now, even if you were to come back, sweet words and spontaneous gestures would no longer be enough. Now, you seek something else. Depth, intention, coherence. So let me ask you sincerely. Has it ever happened that after waiting for someone for so long, you finally found yourself and realized that was the company you needed most? If so, share it below. Your story may plant a seed of clarity in someone who still feels lost. Now he begins to remember you. But not from the place he once did. Not as the woman who always replied. Not the one waiting in silence for a sign to try again. Now he remembers you from a different gaze. As the woman who walked away without making noise. And that quiet departure echoed louder than any goodbye. Because over time, your silence became a symbol. And as Carl Jung said, symbols are the purest language of the unconscious. They cannot be ignored. They cannot be rationalized. They can only be felt. And he feels you. Even if he can't see you. He feels you in the song that once belonged to both of you. In the corner of the house where you used to sit. In the stillness of late hours when memory meets regret. He feels you in moments of stillness. When the noise of the external world fades, and the inner world grows louder. And it's in that stillness that he begins to do something he never truly did before. Introspection. He starts to question himself. Why do I miss her, even though she said nothing? What was it about her presence that now feels like a sudden absence? Jung said that true growth arises from inner conflict. And you, through your silence, have quietly ignited that very conflict. Yes, he might try to return. He may appear with eloquent words, carefully constructed apologies, and promises of change. But now, it's not what he says that captures your attention. It's how he sustains it. You no longer listen to be swept away by hope. You listen for coherence. The alignment between feeling and action. Between regret and responsibility. And this is where many women fall into the emotional trap. Confusing guilt for love. Nostalgia for commitment. But you, if you've come this far, you know better. You know the difference. You've learned that emotion without action is nothing more than desire. And someone who truly loves you doesn't just return. They return transformed. They come back having understood something, having faced themselves, having looked into the mirror of the relationship, and chosen to shed the skin of who they were when they lost you. You are not closed off to love. You are closed off to repeating what once wounded you. And that is not bitterness. It's emotional maturity. Jung wrote that individuation is the path to the fullness of the soul. And you are walking that path, even while he is still crawling through his process. This is not arrogance. It's clarity. So let me ask you, has someone ever come back to you with sweet words, yet something inside you knew it was no longer your time, no longer your place? Have you ever felt that self-love spoke louder than any late declaration of affection? If so, write it down here, because your clarity could be the light someone else is still searching for. He may not admit it, not to you, not even to himself, but deep down, he knows he's lost you. Not because he walked away, but because he stopped finding you. Because when a woman is no longer emotionally available, it's not the silence that wounds, it's the serene indifference. That calmness that doesn't ask, doesn't accuse, doesn't beg. That quiet strength that shows him he no longer holds the same place in your world. Carl Jung said that true transformation occurs when we stop projecting our inner voids onto others. And that is exactly what has happened with you. You no longer project. You no longer wait for him to complete you. Because you have realized you were never empty. You were only disconnected from yourself. He, on the other hand, keeps searching for signs. Perhaps he runs into you somewhere. Perhaps he sends another message. Perhaps he speaks to someone who knows you. But each attempt is tinged with anxiety, not love. Because it's not that he suddenly values you more. It's that he now feels diminished without you. And that is not love. That is a wounded ego. But you no longer respond the way you once did. Not because you've grown cold, but because you have healed. And in healing, you have stopped negotiating your peace. You have stopped trying to convince someone of your worth. Because you finally understand. If someone cannot see your value in your presence, they will not appreciate it in your absence either. And that truth, though painful, sets you free. He might play one last card, opening up, showing vulnerability, promising he has changed. And maybe he has. But now you know that true change is not spoken. It is demonstrated through time, consistency, and maturity. Meanwhile, you continue on your path. Not out of pride, but out of commitment to yourself. Because there is a part of you that no longer wants to return to the place where you lost yourself. The part that learned how to be alone without feeling abandoned. The part that learned to listen to yourself without fearing silence. The part that now chooses from love, not from lack. And now, with all the respect and tenderness this moment deserves, I ask you, have you reached that point of no return? That moment when you realize that even if someone came back, they could no longer touch what they once touched in you. If so, share your story in the comments. Your words might become a compass for another woman, still uncertain whether to move forward. Now, he truly feels your absence. But it's not just the absence of a woman. It is the absence of something deeper, the emotional energy you embodied, the feeling of stability, care, the silent support you offered even when he didn't deserve it. And now, in your absence, he realizes what you lost and what he lost. But you are no longer where he left you. You have walked an inner path he cannot even begin to imagine. You faced your wounds, your emptiness, your deepest unconscious desires. And in that silent journey, you found yourself again, recognized yourself, and chose yourself. Carl Jung said that loneliness does not come from the lack of people around us, but from the inability to share what is meaningful to us. And that is exactly what you did when you fell silent. You stopped speaking so he could feel what you had carried alone all along. Your silence was your final word, your most powerful act. Now, if he returns, you look at him from a different place. Not from a longing to be loved, but from the fullness of knowing you are complete. And that does not mean you cannot love again. It means that love no longer means losing yourself. It means sharing yourself. He may tell you he misses you, that he finally understands, that he is ready to do things differently, and you'll listen, not because you need to close your heart for protection anymore, but because your heart now protects itself. It knows how to distinguish empty words from genuine presence. And if you choose to open a door, it won't be out of fear of loneliness, but a conscious decision to share your path with someone worthy of walking beside you. No games, no manipulation, no hollow promises, only truth. And if you choose not to return, it won't be from resentment, but because you've learned that someone who didn't cherish you in your presence does not deserve your return in their solitude. Now I invite you to reflect honestly. Have you ever felt so fully returned to yourself that no one could pull you out of your center again? Has that happened to you? If so, share your story in the comments. Your words might be exactly what another woman needs to hear today. Thank you for making it this far. Thank you for choosing yourself. And thank you for showing that silence can also be a revolution.